Welcome to this video where we'll introduce you to JES, our development environment, and show you some mathematical operations. Now this is JES and hopefully you already have it installed on your computer. Up at the top we have the definitions window, which we'll discuss more in another video, but in this video we're going to focus down here in the command area. Now, this area is an interactive Python interpreter, or what can otherwise be called as a read eval print loop. What it's going to happen is we can write Python code right here, press enter, Python will read it, evaluate what it means, and print out the result of running that code. So the first example is just type a number right here and then press the enter key. And you can see what happened is Python read this in, evaluated it. It's really simple. It just says, oh, that's the number 5, and it prints out the result, which is a number 5. Now, just a quick note, as you're typing, if you notice this, there's a little space right in here. If you ever get your cursor right next to that and you try to type, nothing will come out. So you have to make sure your cursor has a space right there. Another thing you cannot do is you cannot try to go up and edit previous things that you've done before. So I'm trying to type right now, nothing is happening. You have to get your cursor on the bottom line right here, the very bottom one, and one space over, and then you should be able to type. So we can really type any number we want here, and Python will just print it right back out to us. We can also have numbers with decimal points. Now these numbers with decimal points are different than these numbers that are whole numbers. The computer interprets these as integers, and numbers with decimal points, it figures those are floating point numbers. Now, another thing we could type here are strings, and strings start with a double quote mark so that you press shift and next to the colon around the L key, you'll get a double quote mark, and then you can type any word or words that you want, even with spaces, and then you end it with another double quote mark. So notice there's a beginning double quote mark and an ending double quote mark, and when we press enter, the computer just prints the string back to us. Now, we can also use a single quote mark or an apostrophe. And we just have to make sure if we use a double quote mark, we close it with a double quote mark. If we use a single quote mark, we have to close it with a single quote mark. But either way that you want to do it, it really doesn't make much of a difference, at least at this point in the class. Now, I'd like to introduce you to the concept of a type. If you notice, we have integers right here without a decimal point. We have numbers with a decimal point called floating point numbers, and we have strings. And the way that each one of these is encoded is different. Now, if you remember, encoding is the way that we take something real and we convert it into ones and zeros so we can store it inside of the computer. So each one of these is stored using a different format. Our integers are stored using binary. Our floating point numbers are stored in a different way that is actually pretty complex, so we won't talk about it much in this class. Strings are stored using ASCII or Unicode. And in fact, strings can also have numbers like I ate 4 apples. Now this 4 right here is encoded differently than an integer right here. This 4 is encoded using ASCII versus this, the 5 right here is encoded using binary. So we can't mix and match these two things because the way they're stored in the computer is different. And so that is called a type. A type basically refers to something and how it is encoded on the computer. So right now we have 3 types: integers, floating point numbers, and strings. Now the next thing we're going to talk about are operations. And operations are things that we perform on our data or our types. So we have our typical mathematical operations. So we could type in a number, a mathematical operator like plus and another number, press enter, and now we really see this read eval print loop working. It reads in this expression right here, 5 plus 4. It evaluates what it means and comes up with the answer 9 and prints out the answer 9 down below. So we can try other mathematical operators like 12 divided by 3, and we get 4. And we also have subtraction, 10 minus 3, and we get 7. And notice this space in between here is optional. We can put spaces there if we want, or we can leave them out. Now the last operator we have here is the multiply operator, and that's with the asterisk. And to get that, you hold down Shift and press the number 8. So 5 multiplied by 3, and we get 15. Now let's show you some operators that we can do on strings. So I can say hello right here is one string, and then I can use the plus operator and then put class as a second string. And this is called concatenation, where we take two smaller strings and join them together to make one longer string. So you could see that the two strings are now joined together. If you notice, it doesn't put a space in between the strings. If we wanted a space, we would have to concatenate on a string with a space. So notice we have a double quote mark, a space, and another double quote mark. So now we're going to concatenate hello to the space to class, and now we'll have a space between the hello and class. The next operator that we can perform on strings that I'll show you is the repeat operator, which is like the multiply operator. It's that hold down Shift and press 8 to get the asterisk, and then we use a number behind it. So what we're going to say is repeat hello 5 times, and we get a string with 5 hellos inside of it. Now I'm going to show you a type error. Watch when I try to do hello and I try to multiply it by another string. This is a type error. Notice it says the word type and invalid type through this message. Now, when you get an error, I highly recommend to read the error message and try to figure out what it's trying to tell you. Now, this is because the multiply operator only works on two numbers or on a string and a number. It does not work on two strings, and it doesn't know what to do with this. So basically, it's kind of saying this type does not make sense right here. If you don't want to type something again, if you want to repeat what you did on the last line, just press the up arrow and you'll see that what you typed before will appear. You can press the up arrow again and go through the history of the things that you've typed in the command area. You can also press the down arrow to go forward in the history until you get back to a blank line. Now let's try one more thing with numbers. Let's go ahead and take 1 divided by 4. Now hopefully you know that that's 1/4 or 0.25. But if you notice, we get 0 back. Why did we get 0 back? Because we did this operation on integers or whole numbers. There's no way to encode a decimal point in integers. The computer just can't put anything there. So what it does is it just ignores the decimal point, and we get 0. Notice if we do 5 divided by 4, that should be 1.25, but the computer is going to ignore the decimal point and just give us 1 back. Essentially, it's always going to round down. If we really want the decimal point, we have to use floating point numbers. So we could go 5.0 divided by 4.0. And now that we're using floating point numbers, the computer has a way to encode the decimal point. And when we press enter, we see 1.25 like we would expect. Now that's all I'm going to teach you in this video. I highly recommend that you try out other operations with different numbers and get the hang of working with JES.